those of you that were here 2 weeks ago, we had somewhat of an introduction to Nehemiah. And we looked at where Nehemiah is found on the timeline of the Old Testament. So if you remember, the book of Nehemiah, it starts about 445 BC, and it's toward the end of the Babylonian exile. It's roughly 30 years after the time of Esther, the same location in Shushan Palace. And so we find Nehemiah, he would have been after Esther's time. And it's one of the last records of the Bible, or records of the Old Testament Jews. So chronologically, Malachi would come between Nehemiah and the Old Testament. So if the Old Testament was chronological, it would be, we want to understand Nehemiah, Malachi, and then Matthew. So in chapter 1, Nehemiah takes interest and inquires about those that have returned to Jerusalem. He feels the pain of the situation. That's just not what it should be. And I'd like to read a verse, Isaiah 62, 1 through 3, a couple verses. Isaiah 62, 1 through 3, we'll read those verses. For Zion's sake will I not hold my peace, and for Jerusalem's sake I will not rest, until the righteousness thereof go forth as brightness, and the salvation thereof as a lamp that burneth. And the Gentiles shall see thy righteousness, and all kings thy glory. And thou shalt be called by a new name, which the mouth of the Lord shall name. Thou shalt also be a crown of glory in the hand of the Lord, and a royal diadem in the hand of thy God. So this was God's desire for Israel. And Nehemiah knew that. And he knew that they were supposed to be a light to those around them. They were supposed to have glory. It says here too that all kings shall see thy glory and thy righteousness, and you'll be called by a new name. You'll be like a crown of glory in the hand of the Lord, and a royal diadem in the hand of thy God. So Nehemiah, he was familiar with God's will for Israel, and they were supposed to be this kind of a city on a hill among the nations around them. And so when Nehemiah in chapter 1, when he hears about the condition of Jerusalem, he was crushed because he knew that they weren't filling, that Jerusalem was not coming up to that standard that God had for them. And then he spends days and morning fasting and praying for the ones in affliction. He also aligns himself with what he knows to be God's will. And he actually repents for the sin of the nation of Israel and reminds God about his covenant with them. So those are some things that we talked about last time. He actually repented as if for the nation of Israel, as if he was the one that had sinned. He said, we have sinned. So today I want to take a closer look at who Nehemiah was. And I think he was an ordinary man. Let's go to Nehemiah 1, and we'll start in verse 11, the last verse of the chapter there. So Nehemiah 1:11, he's finishing his prayer here. And he says, O Lord, I beseech thee, let now thine ear be attentive to the prayer of thy servant and to the prayer of thy servants who desire to fear thy name and prosper. I pray thee, thy servant this day, and grant him mercy in the sight of this man, for I was the king's cupbearer. So here we have Nehemiah praying for mercy in the king's sight. And as we take a look, who does God choose for his work, to fulfill a vision? So who can we expect for God to choose, say from among us or whatever? Who does God use to do his work? and let's look at some of the things about Nehemiah. You remember we talked about last time a little bit, but Nehemiah was not a spiritual leader. He was not in a position of spiritual leadership. In fact, he was employed by a pagan king 800 miles from Jerusalem. And he had probably never seen Jerusalem. I don't know that for a fact, but he was 800 miles away and had been in captivity for hundreds of years. And he probably didn't even know what Jerusalem looked like. But he still knew God's will. He knew what Jerusalem was supposed to stand for and how it was supposed to be. He was also a cupbearer. He was the cupbearer for the king. And I think we can probably deduct from that he was a trustworthy man. And King Artaxerxes had to have a lot of confidence in him. Because the cupbearer, from what I understand, the cupbearer would actually taste probably the wine and the food that the king drank and ate before it got to the king, because if somebody had poisoned the food or the wine, then Nehemiah would die first. And so the king, that was one of the rules of the cupbearer, was kind of as a protection for the king. And so obviously Artaxerxes trusted him, because if he wouldn't have, if there would have been anything rotten in his character, he would not have been the cupbearer for the king. And we also notice that he was a man of prayer. In the first chapter, remember, here it says that he sat down for days and he wept and he fasted and he prayed before the God of heaven. And let's see here. And he was a man who cared deeply about God's people. He cared enough to ask about the state of Jerusalem, and then obviously he cared enough to be really sad and pray and fast for them. Okay, so the takeaway, I guess, from this section would be that to make a difference in this world, you don't have to be the best, you just have to care the most. And I think you'll find that with people that make a big difference in the world around them, whatever it is, it can be, just anything. So you'll find that the people that make the biggest difference are not those that are maybe educated the most, or maybe they're not the richest, but it's people that care, just care enough to pray and care enough to actually take action. Because we can know about a need or a problem, but if we don't care, then it's not going to change. We're not going to change it anyhow. So we see then that Nehemiah was a man with a plan. Sorry, my slides are not. Stuff showing up when it's not supposed to here. But we'll go to Nehemiah 2, and we'll read 1 through 8 right now. So this would have been a couple months after Hananiah, his brother, told him about the situation of Jerusalem here. Verse 1, it came to pass in the month Nisan, in the 20th year of Artaxerxes the king, that wine was before him, and I took up the wine and gave it unto the king. Now I had not been before time sad in his presence. So we could we could say here that Nehemiah was probably a cheerful person. I said that he had never been sad in the king's presence before. And it says, wherefore the king said unto me, why is thy countenance sad? Seeing thou art not sick, this is nothing else but sorrow of heart. Then I was very sore afraid. And said unto the king, let the king live forever. Why should not my countenance be sad? When the city, the place of my fathers' sepulchres, lieth waste, and the gates thereof are consumed with fire. Then the king said unto me, for what dost thou make request? And notice the next phrase. It said, so I prayed to the God of heaven. We see this over and over through the book of Nehemiah, that he prayed and just asked God for wisdom. In the first chapter he prayed for a long period of time, and then as we go through the book we'll see where he just stopped and prayed before he did something. And so he was a man of prayer. In verse 5, I said to the king, if it please the king, and if thy servant have found favor in thy sight, that thou wouldest send me unto Judah, unto the city of my father's sepulchres, that I may build it. And the king said unto me, the queen also sitting by him, for how long shall thy journey be? And when wilt thou return? So it pleased the king to send me, and I set him a time. Moreover, I said unto the king, if it please the king, let letters be given me to the governors beyond the river, that they may convey me over until I come unto Judah. And a letter to Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest, that he may give me timber to make beams for the gates of the palace, which appertained to the house, and for the wall of the city, and for the house that I shall enter into. And the king granted me according to the good hand of my God upon me. Okay, so first of all, we see here that Nehemiah planned carefully. And I'm not exactly focusing on leadership here, but as we look at Nehemiah, he was a man of tremendous leadership. And some of the steps that he took and the plan that he had to accomplish this great task, if you would follow them, I think you could be a good leader. So we'll just look at some of these things in that light. So Nehemiah planned carefully. And more on the planning there. We see when the king asked him what he wanted, I wonder if he hadn't already thought about it for a while and came up with a plan, because it says, well, he asked first of all to be sent, but then he says, yeah, if you would send letters, to this person and that person, this person to help me across, and to get me there, and this person to give lumber and all that. He obviously he knew his stuff. He knew what needed to happen in order for all this to come to pass. So Nehemiah was a planner, and this probably wasn't the first time that he had thought about it. He had made his plans carefully, and then he acts in spite of his fear. So we see here that he's not fearless, but it says that he was very afraid. Which verse was it here? It says in verse 2, then I was very sore afraid. But he acts in spite of the fear. What would have we done in that situation as if you have a plan, or if you have a dream, or whatever it is that you'd like to accomplish, in that moment when the king asked him, well, what do you want? Like, what is it you're asking for? It would have been pretty easy for him just to say, well, I'm sad about it. It's the place of my forefathers. That's where they grew up, and it's bothering me or whatever. But instead, he actually asked the king for what he wants. So he pushes through that fear, and then he moves beyond prayer. So we see up to this point that he had prayed a lot about his vision. And he said a quick prayer here when the king asked him. But then he goes further and he asks, he actually tells the king what it is that he would like from the king. And just looking at his fear and the request that he made, remember that this King Artaxerxes, if you remember from last time we talked about, this was the same king that had sent Ezra. Ezra and a big group of the Jews had allowed them to go back to Jerusalem to re-inhabit and to rebuild the temple. But then, I don't know how much longer it was later, but he actually called the work off because of the enemies. Israel's enemies had told him that, hey, they're going to rise up against you, so he had actually shut the work down. And so this was the same king that Ezra had done this to Ezra, and so why would he be any different to Nehemiah? Why would he grant Nehemiah what he was asking? I think he was confident of what God's will was, and so he pushes through his fear, and he actually goes past praying. So how often do we the dreams that we have, they go no further than just praying about them. We don't actually step out, and there's various reasons for that, I think. But one of them, might be that we, maybe we're not so serious about the things that we, want to do for God. And so, maybe in that case we won't go further, won't do anything more than pray about it. So, and then after praying, he defines his mission to somebody else. And I think this is important for a variety of reasons, but maybe some of them would be that we don't always think clearly. Proverbs 11:14. Let's read that. Proverbs 11:14 says, "Where no counsel is, the people fall, but in the multitude of counselors there is safety." So that's one reason for sharing with other people about what we'd like to do, is to bounce it off of them, and so we could be seen more clearly what we want to do. And then number two, another good reason for defining your mission to other people is that you probably don't have the resources to pull it off without other people. So a lot of times we need other people's help in order to make something happen. But we see here that he clearly articulates what he envisions as the solution to the problem at hand. He was clear about what needed to happen. And notice too that he offers himself as part of the solution. So he offers himself and his services. He doesn't just tell the king, send some of your guys over there and fix the city, build the walls, but he says, I'm willing. And that reminds me of a verse in Isaiah 6:8. Let's go to Isaiah. Isaiah 6:8 says, "Also I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send? And who will go for us? Then said I, Here am I, send me." So, we see here in Isaiah's case, God didn't say, "Isaiah, I need you to go speak to the children of Israel." He didn't tell Isaiah that he needs him as a prophet, but it's almost as if Isaiah overheard that there was a need, and he said, "I'm here, send me, I'm willing." And we see the same thing with Nehemiah, that he put himself in a position to be used. It wasn't like, he didn't hear God saying, this is your job. But instead, because of his concern for the problem, for the state of the children of Israel and Jerusalem, because of his position in that way, he was ready to be used of God. And so that's the way it's going to be many times with us. I think a lot of times we like to hear God saying, this is my plan for your life. It would be great if it would be an audible voice, right? But God, most times, is not going to work that way. We need to be in a position where we're willing to step up or to offer ourselves and our services to God. So, word of warning here with the things that we're seeing is that this is only going to work if God is the author of your vision. So, I think if you align yourself with God's known will, and you follow some of the steps that Nehemiah followed here. He prayed, and he moved. Moved out in courage, even when he was afraid. And remember that he knew what God's will was. A lot of times when we have maybe a dream or something that we want to accomplish, it doesn't always line up with what God wants. It's pretty easy to be selfish, I think, and so that's this only works if God is leading us in this direction. But yeah, I think we see here that Nehemiah was selfless in his desire. We see that as we go through the book. He just offered himself. He was God's man, and it wasn't for his personal gain. Okay, then, so the plan acted on. We see after he had come up with a plan, he mentioned it to the king. He asked the king for what he needed. Then he acted on it. So for this section, I'd like to read Nehemiah 2. Yeah, the rest of Nehemiah 2 here. We'll read from 9 through 20. Nehemiah chapter 2, we'll read the rest of the chapter here. Somehow my slideshow's not quite working. Okay, so starting in verse 9, then I came to the governors beyond the river and gave them the king's letters. Now the king had sent captains of the army and horsemen with me. When Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the servant, the Ammonite, heard of it, it grieved them exceedingly that there was come a man to seek the welfare of the children of Israel. So I came to Jerusalem and was there 3 days. And I rose in the night, I and some fellow men, some few men with me. Neither told I any man what my God had put in my heart to do at Jerusalem. Neither was there any beast with me save the beast that I rode upon. And I went out by night by the gate of the valley, even before the dragon well, and to the dung port, and viewed the walls of Jerusalem, which were broken down, and the gates thereof were consumed with fire. Then I went on to the gate of the fountain and to the king's pool, for there was no place for the beast that was under me to pass. Then went I up in the night by the brook, and viewed the wall, and turned back, and entered by the gate of the valley, and so returned. And the rulers knew not whither I went, or what I did. Neither had I as yet told it to the Jews, nor to the priests, nor to the nobles, nor to the rulers, nor to the rest that did the work. Then said I unto them, Ye see the distress that we are in, how Jerusalem lieth waste, and the gates thereof are burned with fire. Come, let us build up the wall of Jerusalem, and be no more a reproach, that we be no more a reproach. Then I told them of the hand of my God, which was good unto me, as also the king's word that he had spoken unto me. And they said, Let us rise up and build. So they strengthened their hands for this good work. But when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the servant, the Ammonite, and Geshem the Arabian heard it, they laughed us to scorn, and despised us, and said, What is this thing that ye do? Will ye rebel against the king? Then answered I them, and said unto them, The God of heaven, he will prosper us. Therefore we as servants will arise and build, that ye have no portion, nor right, nor memorial in Jerusalem. Okay, so we see the end of verse 8 that the king actually granted him what he asked, and that was because of the relationship that he had with him, but more than anything, it was because God simply moved the king's heart to do this for Nehemiah. And yeah, like I said, so Nehemiah had followed all these steps to make certain that this was God's will and how to move forward. And so when he asked the king, then God simply moved the heart of the king to do what Nehemiah wanted. So yeah, he leaves and he's on his way, and it says that the enemies would have been the enemies of Israel. It says that they were grieved. And notice the wording here. It says it grieved them exceedingly that there was come a man to seek the welfare of the children of Israel. So they were quite happy with where Israel was at. Israel was a reproach, like I said in the first chapter, and they were quite okay with that. And it grieved them when there was come somebody to help the children of Israel. And then once in Jerusalem, Nehemiah's course of action was consistent with his previous plans. He entered the city with humility. And just think about it. So Nehemiah had basically asked to be the governor of Israel and Jerusalem here. And yeah, that's pretty much what the king had granted him. He'd given him all the power to go. And so he could have come in with a big show. In fact, I actually wonder how he entered the city without the Israelites, really questioning what was happening here, because the king had sent an army with him to keep him safe. And so how did he come in without them wondering what he was up to? But it says that he was there for 3 days, and he got up in the night, and a couple men with him, and he said that he hadn't told anybody about what God was doing or what God wanted to do through him. So he was humble. It would have been easy for him to come in and say, this is what I'm here for. This is, we're here to take charge and rebuild and to fix your problems, but he didn't do that. And so he went out, by cover of night and just assessed the situation. And he assessed it, firsthand before he proceeded. And then we see, after he had looked at it by night, then he gathered them together. And let's read verse 17. Then said I unto them, Ye see the distress that we are in, how Jerusalem lieth waste, and the gates thereof are burned with fire. So why did he use this wording? He identified with them. He said, we're in distress. And it would have been pretty easy for him here again to say, you guys are in distress. He could have said, you guys have serious problems here. You need someone to fix them for you. And here I am. I'll take care of you. But instead, he identifies with them. He said, we're in distress. He says, Jerusalem lieth waste, and the gates are burned with fire. And then it's the invitation. He says, come and let us build up the wall of Jerusalem, that we be no more a reproach. And then, after identifying with them, then he told them what God was doing in his heart and in his life. Then I told them of the hand of my God, which is good upon me, as also the king's words that he had spoken unto me. And they said, let us rise up and build. So they strengthened their hands for this good work. So somehow they got right on board with him. I think that was probably at least in partly due to the way that he came in. He didn't come in proudly and just wanted to fix their problems. But instead he identified with them, and so then when he gave them the offering, he told them about what God was doing and what the king how the king had sent him, then they were all in. And as we go through the rest of Nehemiah, I think we'll see, just more of how Nehemiah's leadership abilities and just the way that he was able to really get the people, rallied together, and he just had something about him that he was able to do that. He was inspiring because of these things. He was able to inspire others to join him in his vision. Okay, I think that's all I have for this Sunday. Lord willing, we'll continue with the book, and then we'll go into the building the wall and some of the things that happened in Jerusalem after Nehemiah got there.